Jacoby. Today we're interviewing Michael O'Connor. Hi.
Jacoby, it's nice. I'm really glad I'm here.
All right. Thank you for being here today.
You're very welcome.
All right. So what did you do for your career?
Well, I have a little bit of a different background than maybe some of the people that you've already interviewed. I started off actually wanting to be a Roman Catholic missionary. I was going to go to Tanzania. And after a number of years after college, I left and I went to work as a social worker for the welfare department in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And after that, I worked in a program for people coming out of prison, and eventually ended up as what was called statutorily the executive secretary, but what was the executive director of the Massachusetts Parole Board. And after having done that, I kind of switched up and went to work in the private sector, worked at Wang Laboratories doing software development and managing a group of people that actually implemented an application around the world in 17 different countries. And then my last job was actually, after doing some consulting, working at a small boutique organization doing software implementation. So I've had a little bit of a different kind of career. Things have changed and morphed, and so.
Did you enjoy your jobs? And if you did, what did you like about them?
I enjoyed every single one of them, and every one of them was different and was a challenge. So when I was working as a social worker with the welfare department, I actually ran into a young gentleman who was very much involved in the drug scene, and unfortunately he passed away, he died. And that kind of motivated me to try to figure out what I could do to do some work helping people, and which led me to working with prisoners, and through various contacts ended up doing just a whole lot of other things. But I enjoyed the parole board tremendously. I got to work with legislators, I got to work with the state police, I worked with DEA and the FBI, I worked with just all kinds of people doing all sorts of things, trying to make life a little bit better. And I enjoyed the software environment because it was new. It was something I had never done before. I had no idea of what that was like and what you needed to do, so it was a whole other set of skills that I needed to develop. And so, yeah, I enjoyed every single one of the jobs one way or another. They all had their times when it wasn't so pleasant, but I did enjoy them all. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. What was your least favorite aspect about your job?
The least favorite. Well, I was talking actually to my wife about this when I saw the questions that you gave before, and I said, what was the least favorite? And it really got me to thinking, what was? I mean, I knew I could remember all the good parts, but what was it that was not so much fun? And if I could try to summarize it all, it was trying to convince people who had the power and authority to make decisions what was the right decision to make. When those individuals didn't really have all of the information that they needed to make the right decision, but trying to convince them and to work with them and to get them to trust me that I had the right information, that was probably the hardest part of the job, because I think I'm always right. As I'm sure a lot of people think that they're always right, and I'm not necessarily always right, but so that was the hardest part of the job.
Did you regret any decisions you made in the law as an officer?
Did I regret any decisions that I made? I look back on that and say, of course, you don't always make the right decision 100% of the time. Nobody does that. I wish that when I was your ages, that I had made some different decisions than I made. I wish I had spent time trying to learn how to learn, because if you get a sense of what my career was like, I had to learn things over 60 years of working. So I had to always be on top of things and learn something new all the time. It wasn't like I had a career. I wasn't, an accountant that did numbers all the time that never changed. 1, 2, 3, 4 always is the same. I had to change, and I wish I had spent some time at your ages learning how to learn, because I think that was probably the thing that, as I look back on it, I wish I had done better at. And you always, the thing I always used to tell my staff when I was managing people was, I'd much rather you make a decision than sit there and not do anything. Because once a decision is made, you always have the opportunity to change that decision most of the time. But to take action and be proactive and not just sit around and wait for something to happen, but to be proactive and make it happen. So, but yes, I made a lot of bad decisions. I made a lot of things that I wish I could take back.
How often did you deal with people? What kind of relationships have you kept over time?
Well, there wasn't a single job that I ever got that I did not get because somebody knew either me personally or knew of me. So I used to spend a lot of time getting to try to know people. For instance, I would do things like every organization that I ever joined or was part of, first thing I got to do was to know who the janitor was or the custodian and who the secretaries were. Because even though I might have had a title or been in a position of authority, I really always wanted to know who were the people that really made things happen. And I found in my career that the janitors and the secretaries were the one who knew how everything worked. There's an old adage, you make sure you're kind to the people as you go up the ladder, because you never know if you have to come down the ladder that you might meet those same people on the way down, and you want them to be there to help you. So to this day, I keep in contact with people from the parole board that I worked with, people from Wang Laboratories that I worked with, from people from Partners Healthcare that I worked with. I just ran into, for instance, somebody who was at Trader Joe's in Hingham, and this was about 3 weeks ago, and I'm walking behind this woman, and I said, she looks familiar. And I said to her, Anna, is that you? And she turned around and said, remembered who I was and thanked me because I had given her an opportunity years ago for a job. And she said, I just want you to know that that was a turning point for me, and you really helped me a lot. I almost broke down and cried. I mean, to know that you've had that kind of an impact on somebody, and that they remember you, and that it's important in their life, it's something that had really great meaning. So I have somebody who I worked with doing a software implementation program who lives in Lake Tahoe, and every time I hear that there's a snowstorm out there, I email him away and ask him, make sure that he's okay. I haven't seen him in 12 years, but I still try to keep in contact. So building those relationships and making sure that people remember who you are and that you remember who they are is extremely important. And as I said, I never got a job in my entire 60 years of working where it was not because somebody either knew me personally or knew of me. So I spent a lot of time in my professional career making sure that I got to meet and interact with a lot of people because they always helped me.
What was your most memorable experience in your career?
The most memorable? That's a really good question because I have a lot that stick out. But possibly the one where I did something that people said was impossible. So at the time, there was the American Correctional Association had a program where they were certifying criminal justice agencies, and this was when I was at the parole board. So they had a dual set of standards that had to be made. One was for the authority itself, the decision makers, and the other was for all of the parole officers. So there were two sets of standards that had to be met, and nobody had ever done both of them at the same time. So we did the work, staff and me, did the work to make sure that we got both, and we received accreditation for both of those organizations at the same time, at the same meeting. And it was the first ever done, and to the best of my knowledge, never done since. I think that and the time that I was inducted into the Smithsonian Institute for innovators in technology. We had built an application for the United Way of Mass Bay and was nominated to be inducted into the Smithsonian. So I got to do that and go down to Washington, D.C. and receive my medal and have my parents there. And that was probably a very proud moment, not only for them, but I was glad for them that they were there. So I think those two kind of stick out in my mind, but there were a lot of others. I was very fortunate in my career to have met an awful lot of really good, dedicated people. So that's what I did.
What advice would you give a high schooler that's interested in this field?
Well, because I've had so many careers, I spent a lot of time thinking about that question, by the way. And I think my suggestion or my advice would be really two things, not just one, but two. I think when you're in I was talking with one of the high school kids at my church in Melrose, and I was asking him, I told him I was going to be doing this, and I said, if you were here, what would you say to them? Because it might be more meaningful than something that I would say. And he said, when I started high school, people told me to enjoy the moment and to live in the moment and to enjoy the ride because you only get to do high school once. And so enjoy it and do what you can to enjoy it. I would suggest that the second thing is that use this time to figure out what you really want to do. Not so much of a job or so much of a career, but what do you really want to do? During my junior and senior year of high school, I decided that what I really wanted to do was to try to make this a better world. That's what I wanted to try to do. So that led me into studying to be a priest. It led me into social work. It led me into all kinds of, careers. But the one thing that's constant through all of those is that every job I took, I did it with the intent of making it a better place for people than it was when I was first there. so that when I left something that was better. And that's what I wanted to do. And if you look at every one of my jobs from beginning to end, that's what happened. I made it a little bit better. And so spend some time thinking about that. Because then what you find, and I'm sure you've had a couple other people who said the same thing, then you don't end up working. You end up doing what's really important and what's really kind of your passion. What is it that you really want to do? And then you'll never work a day in your life. You'll always be doing something to make things better.
Yeah.
Those would be the two things I would suggest.
All right, last question. Could you tell us more about the charitable foundations you worked with?
The charitable foundations. Really? That's a new question. I didn't have that. So let me see.
That might be a question for another person, right, Ben? Do you think?
I can tell you.
Work with charitable foundations?
What?
Did you work with charitable foundations?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, okay. All right.
I did. It doesn't come up. I didn't say that when I responded, but yeah, I did. I worked for the United Way of Mass Bay. The United Way in Boston, I work for. It's a charitable organization. We used to raise $50 million a year, and we would distribute that to organizations. And in fact, it was because of that job and the application that we built to be able to show how money was distributed that led me to the honor of being inducted into the Smithsonian. And the other job that I had was working for Partners Healthcare. And Partners Healthcare raised anywhere between $350 and $400 million a year. And my job was to manage the group that oversaw the application that managed all of those transactions. So, yeah, I worked with both of those. And what we've also decided, my wife and I mean, what we're doing is we're giving money that we've been fortunate enough to be able to accrue. We're giving it away. We're giving it to people. We're giving it to organizations that are doing what we think to be doing the right thing. So that's what I've done.
All right. Thank you for taking time to talk to us today.
It was really enjoyable. Nice meeting you too.
Nice meeting you.